Hello and welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint Show. I am your host, Jay Jones. Black Entrepreneur Blueprint was created specifically to educate and inspire Black entrepreneurs to launch, build, and grow successful businesses. Join us as we help build an economic power base in the Black community by promoting business ownership. If you are currently an entrepreneur or want to be an entrepreneur, we invite you to join us every week here at Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint, episode number 360. I'm your host, Jay Jones, and today we have another outstanding and informative show in store for you. Today we're going to be speaking with Miss Medina Jett, the founder of Jett Speaks. Now, Medina is an attorney and a former corporate executive and founder of an international firm that provides legal and compliance services to Wall Street firms. Subsequent to the sale of that firm, Medina started Jett Speaks, where she focuses on financial literacy, diversity and inclusion, women's empowerment, and career development. Now, before we get to the interview, I just want to share a few things with the BEB family. First and foremost, I want to welcome all first-time listeners to Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Welcome to the BEB family. Please stick around until the end of today's broadcast, and I'm going to share all my contact information and resource links, such as the link to my new book, A New Black Wall Street, Circulating the Black Dollar Worldwide by Building Successful eCommerce Businesses. Also, two platforms I've created to help circulate those dollars in the worldwide Black economy, BeSmartByBlack.com and HireBlackFreelancers.com. I also want to remind you about the new rebranded, rebooted Black Entrepreneur Blueprint Academy. You can go to BEBacademy.com and you can have 5 days free access to all my online courses, trainings, and webinars. So just go to BEBacademy.com. Now, let's get ready for our interview with Miss Medina Jett. We are live with Miss Medina Jett, the founder of JettSpeaks.com. Medina, how are you today?
I am doing very well, Jay. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate you sharing your time with the BEB family. First and foremost, for people who aren't familiar with Medina Jett, can you give us a little personal background on who you are and where you're from, and then we'll get into your amazing entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. So I currently reside in Atlanta. I relocated here from Connecticut about a year and a half ago. Born and raised in Connecticut, in New Haven, about 10 minutes from Yale. I was as most Black women, or a lot of Black women would describe themselves, a poor Black girl living in the inner city. And the one thing about me, I think, is that my parents always stressed in education, as a lot of parents did back then. And so I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to a private school. And that private school really changed the trajectory of my life in terms of exposing me to all the possibilities that existed for me. Because in my neighborhood, people tended to want to be what they saw. And so if they saw their aunts and uncles as social workers or police officers, that's what they aspired to do. But with me, I would meet with my friends' parents and find out what they did for a living and how were they able to afford the mansions that they were living in. And that just opened my eyes to a world of possibilities. And so I went off to law school. After law school, I joined a large law firm in Connecticut and eventually made my way over to corporate America, which is where I wanted to be at that point. Got over to corporate and realized that there weren't a lot of people who looked like me in finance. I'd started off my legal career as a lawyer doing a lot of work with public companies, corporate level research, finance, capital markets. And when I got to corporate, I realized that there's a reason why a lot of people of color are not in that field. And it's because we have just never been exposed to it. And so me always wanting to break new grounds and charge new paths, I decided that that was the field that I wanted to be in. And so I went down this path of finance, working with businesses, I went from Aetna to Cigna Retirement and Investment Services to Prudential Retirement to the Hartford, all in senior executive roles as the chief compliance officer for these companies. And so it sort of made me stand out from a professional perspective, because by the time I reached 40, I had been a senior executive at 3 Fortune 100 companies.
Wow.
All because I was leveraging what I love to do and also trying to make sure that there's representation in the finance arena. So after running compliance for years and years, I decided it was time to do something on my own, be more entrepreneurial. It's compliance, for those of you who are familiar with the role, it's a very, very difficult spot to be in when you're trying to get people to do things that they may not necessarily want to do. The business doesn't necessarily align with compliance and controls and that type of thing. And so I left and started my own company, ICS Group, in 2008.
Okay.
And that started my entrepreneurial journey back then.
Wow. You had mentioned, Medina, about that space, the financial services space. Did you have to get FINRA license too?
I was FINRA licensed. I had held a Series 7 and a Series 24.
Okay.
And I tell you, those exams were no joke.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But after getting my license, I realized that my brain was still very much charged and wanting to learn. And so after I got my Series 24, I applied to business school. And I actually got my MBA when I was 41.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. Right before I started ICS Group.
Yeah, it's funny. In a former life, after I graduated college, I was in the retail side. I worked for Dean Witter and Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
So 7 back then, it was the 63. Now it's what,
still
60.
is.
Yeah, and I had my commodities, which at the time was Series 3. I don't know if it's still Series 3 license. And it's funny because going into that industry as a young Black man right out of college, and I'm trying to accumulate assets and working with clients, and I didn't even have a mortgage of my own, right?
Right.
Or anything. And so, I come from a regular middle class background and didn't have a lot of assets. My parents are, regular folk. And it's funny, I remember just looking at the landscape, and in my office in Philadelphia, when I started at Dean Witter, there was only 2 Black people in the whole 60 of the financial consultants, as we call stockbrokers back then. I got poached by Merrill Lynch. I went over to Merrill Lynch, and out of the 120 in our office, there were about 4, and that was including me, and only 1 woman, woman of color like that. So I know that industry has traditionally been tough for people of color, and especially women of color in that industry. So when you started your company, Integrated Compliance Solutions, ICS, what did that company do, and what made you jump out on your own? Let me ask that first. What made you jump out on your own first, and then what services did you provide with ICS?
Okay, sure. So what made me jump out on my own? I'd gone to business school, all with the notion that I wanted to learn how to run a business. I wasn't sure at that point whether I was going to start my own business or run a business line at the Hartford, where I was at the time. But when I got to business school, I started to realize the world of entrepreneurship was waiting for me, right? And I say that because there was so much focus. I did the executive MBA program at the University of Connecticut School of Business. One of their focuses was on entrepreneurship. So I took an entire session for an entire year all around creating a business plan, marketing strategy, financial projections, cost of goods sold. I mean, we went through everything as if we were really going to start a business. And people got to pick whatever they wanted to do. Because I had been a compliance officer for so long, I decided I was going to create this mythical compliance consulting firm. So I started the blueprints for the firm. And as I was presenting my business to the class, my professor said to me afterwards, like, why aren't you doing this? This is a gold mine. Like, are you kidding me? And I said, gee, I guess there's a plan. And the thing was, because I was doing it for school, I wasn't really thinking about it as a real business, but I basically had a business in a box once I got done. And so if you'll recall, right around 2008, I graduated in May of 2008. That was really at the beginning of the Great Recession.
Oh
right?
yeah, I
So
remember.
yeah, and so the Hartford was starting to realize that they were overinvested in commercial mortgage-backed securities, and so they started pulling back on expenses. They put in a hiring freeze, no lateral moves, and at that point, I was looking forward to a new role somewhere within the Hartford.
Right.
And then when all of that got halted, I said, you know what? I got a business. I'm gung ho about it. I think I can make a run for it. And I left the Hartford and started ICS Group that summer.
Wow.
And
That's
so
that's
it
amazing.
was a ballsy move. A lot of my
Mhm.
mentors said, "Whoa, you don't know what we're going to be in for. We're hearing this recession is going to get pretty bad. This is not the time to be starting a new business."
Right.
But ICS Group was to focus on regulatory requirements for the financial services space. So
Hmm.
the majority of our clients were investment advisors, broker dealers, all of the types of asset management firms that I'd worked with before.
Right.
And as luck would have it, as I was getting ICS Group up and running, Bernie Madoff said, "I'm going to bless you." And and he hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and there was no
Mm.
looking back. Wall
Oh
Street
wow.
reform happened after that. A lot of funds started saying, "Oh my God, we need compliance. We want to make sure that our investors know that we've got our act
Right.
together from that standpoint." And so my phone started ringing off the hook,
That's amazing.
and ICS Group was born.
Did Bernie get any residuals?
He did not.
Well, it's
He
funny
gets an
when
honorable mention once in a
right.
while, but that's about it.
Well, it's funny when you said, "Do I remember 2008?" So I've owned 17 businesses over my 20 plus years as an entrepreneur, and
Okay.
and my first multi-million-dollar business was a mortgage brokerage. I had 50 plus employees, crazy payroll, and that's the first time I almost lost it all. When that crash hit, basically, all the
Yeah.
credit was constricted, and we couldn't close a loan. I don't care if you had an 850 credit score.
Right.
It was tough to close loans. So I do. When you said, "Do I remember 2008?" Oh,
He's
I
like,
definitely
he's like,
remember.
boy, do I.
See, it was good for you, bad for me. You
Yep.
know.
Yep.
So I did an episode that I titled "Indestructible Income," and I talked about having income streams in all types of environment, negative economy, positive economy, and a neutral
Hmm.
economy. And so, yeah, you were on the right end of that one. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, Medina, let me ask you real quick. When you transitioned, take me back to what your mindset was when you left. You were at the Hartford, you said at the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then you opened the doors to ICS. What was that feeling like? And share that with the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint family.
So yeah, so it was unnerving. Never had I been responsible for anybody else's livelihood. Never had I been, and when I started, I literally hired somebody to help me build a website. One
Mhm.
of my best advisors, friends, mentors is a woman by the name of Joanne Price, who
Mhm.
owns Fairview Capital in Connecticut. It's the
Okay.
largest female-owned private equity fund.
Mhm.
So I had her by my side. I would ask her questions. We would have these lunch sessions where we would talk about things like the name of the firm. She
Right.
couldn't stand the first name that I came up with. So we talked about that. We talked
Can you
about
tell us
sort
what
of,
that was?
it was Alpha Investment Services. I was trying to go after the alpha, with
Right.
the investment thing.
Gotcha.
And then I figured I'd get at the beginning of the Google
Right.
Google search. But she was saying it didn't really speak to her. And so we came up with integrated compliance solutions, because all that I always done as a chief compliance officer was to try to integrate compliance policies and procedures into business operations. So it's not this big onerous add-on to what people need to do, and it's integrated and seamless. And that was really what I had always been about, and it's what I wanted to make ICS Group known for. And so I went with Integrated Compliance Solutions Group. But starting the company, it was huge. I mean, I went from being a senior executive, being flown around in private jets and helicopters, to hanging up my shingle in a Regis shared office space.
Right.
And people are like, "What? Have you lost your mind?" And I think, and there was a time where people did think I lost my mind, because
Right.
I had recently turned 40. I decided that I wasn't happily married, so I got a divorce. I left my job. I started this new company and people are like, oh my God, you're going through a midlife crisis. Like
Right.
something is happening there.
Right.
But I knew like what I really needed to do to get my life on the track that I wanted it to be on. And I knew that was going to be business ownership, as hard as it might be to get started.
Right.
And so I remember running to Kinko's, printing out sales presentations and my decks and stuff like that. And it was very, very humbling,
Right.
you know, to go from having all of the resources that the Hartford affords to doing a lot of this stuff on my own. And then, you know, slowly but surely, I started to bring people on board, and I hired a part-time admin and a full-time admin, and then I got the bookkeeper, and then started to hire staff. And but it was a slow progression because I tend to be very risk averse. I
Right.
didn't want to jump out there with a team of 10 people and then have to figure out how I'm going to make payroll.
Right.
And so I took it very, very slowly and methodically. But there were times where I thought I was going to fold,
Yeah.
because even though clients started to call me, there was that period where there was such a drastic dip in the market that a lot of my clients were losing money and they were shutting down.
Right.
So I had hedge fund clients that were closing their doors, and they're like, you know, we're sorry, this is everybody's last day.
Right.
Like, whoa.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And so, but fortunately, I had been in corporate America for so long and had been a senior executive for so long that stock options and savings, like I was well capitalized
Gotcha.
to weather that storm and come out on the other side. And that's what I find a lot of, particularly Black businesses, don't have sufficient operating capital to last that through those growing pains at the first few years, where you've got to ramp up and you've got to get clients, and it takes a while to do all of that.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to ask you about financing your business. So basically, you self-funded it, self-financed it.
Self-financed.
Okay.
Yep. And I used to think that it was something to be proud of, that I didn't have any loans, no debt.
Right.
And then I started to learn, like, leverage is a good thing.
Yeah, leverage is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely is. But it just so happened that I didn't use any leverage, but I certainly am spreading the gospel now. Like, there is nothing wrong with good debt.
Exactly. Good,
So, yeah.
good debt. Exactly.
Yep.
It's funny. I want the light bulb to go off to all the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint family members, and I talk about this on the show a lot. So there's a process to transition from an employee to an entrepreneur. So you don't just wake up one morning and say, hey, you know what? I can't stand my job. I hate my boss. I'm quitting, without a plan and a process to move you from point A to point B. So Medina just hit on it and touched on it. Now, people are coming from different places in financial positions. So you may not be as financially set as you were, Medina, but always plan to make that transition, because the more planning you do and more strategic that you are, the better opportunity that you have to be successful. I wanted to ask you something. You had mentioned people were looking at you and asking you, were you crazy at the time? So mentally, because this is something that a lot of people deal with when they try to become entrepreneurs. There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of outside noise. How did you block that outside noise? And what enabled you to know that this is what you needed to do?
You know, I blocked the outside noise because I've always had to block the outside noise. So I was that kid growing up that got on a yellow school bus and drove me up to an all-white school, where I got off the bus at the end of the day to, oh, you think you're a white girl, oh, you talk white, oh, you think you're smart. So I was used to the noise and talk to the hand kind of thing. And so I just always knew that I have a plan. Nobody else has to get it. Nobody else has to understand it. Like, it's my business. And I just move forward with that. And I think a lot of times people kind of see you doing things, but people knew that I'm not dumb. You know, exactly. I've got a plan, and people knew that eventually they were going to see the fruits of my labor.
Yeah.
But one of the things I always say, there's a graphic that I love. It shows the tip of an iceberg that's above the water. I'm sure you've seen it, and it talks about all those things that people don't see. And that was what I was experiencing, where people would see Oh, I would, celebrate on social media when I got a great, big client. And I
Right.
had, my clients were really like blue chip, black owned. Most of my clients were black owned or women owned asset management firms. And
Hmm.
I had the likes of Ariel
Oh,
Investments,
wow.
Brightwood Capital, Fairview Capital, a lot of the really big names. And so when I would be at their office, I may post something, spending the day at, at Ariel in
Hmm.
Chicago. And all folks saw was, wow, that seems so easy. Like you started a company and now you're making it work. And I'm like, oh, if you only knew there was
Exactly.
so much work that goes into it. So many nights where I just didn't sleep at all because you know that what you hunt, you eat.
That's right.
And it's not as if a paycheck's going to come every 2 weeks like it was before. So it's a totally different mindset where I tell people unless you are hungry
Right.
and persistent and aggressive and tireless and all of those things, like don't go out there and think you're going to start a business because you see other people starting businesses and it looks so easy. It is
Right.
not at all.
It's not. Yeah. One of the things that I want people to take notice of too, you actually stayed in your lane. You were moving from working for somebody else, but the same type of work that you were doing for others, you transitioned that into yourself. A
Absolutely.
lot of times entrepreneurs, you may work at a job and then you want to do something totally different, which you have no idea what that entails until you actually get in and start mixing around a little bit. And then you may find out that, oh, you know what? I picked the wrong, I may have done the wrong thing. So if you could have some type of process where you test the waters before you leave your job, just to understand what it really entails, because you never know that until you step out and you start to make waves and get feedback from your
Absolutely.
customers and prospective customers. I wanted to
Absolutely.
talk to you real quick, Medina, about in terms of ICS. When I was doing my research, it said that you started in 2008 and you sold it how many years later? 12?
I sold it 12 years later. Yeah.
Okay. See, I've been doing my research now.
2020.
20. Okay, cool. So tell us about that process. And did you have an exit strategy planned, or was it something that just made sense to you at the time? And then we're going to jump into what you're doing now, Jet Speaks. But we definitely want to touch base on selling a business because that's something a lot of people haven't had the experience of doing. So I wanted to find out how that happened and was it a planned exit strategy?
Sure. So it was one of those things that's planned, but with no timeline around it. When I started ICS Group, I had always been a very astute business person.
Mhm.
I knew what it meant to build a scalable business versus what some people do. It's like, okay, you're going to make money while you're working it. But then when you stop, the business is gone. Like there's nothing there, no infrastructure.
Right.
And so when I started ICS Group, I started it knowing that eventually I needed to scale it and sell it. And so processes, internal procedures, protocols around how we do this. So when I would bring in a new consultant, there was an onboarding process where they would basically get the blueprint for how we go about servicing our clients. Our templates, our processes, all of that were already embedded in the business from the very beginning because I
Mhm.
knew eventually I'm going to have to step away and some other company is going to buy this. And how does it create, what's the value there for them if I am so attached to it
Right.
that I can't pull away from it? And
Exactly.
so I knew eventually I was going to sell ICS Group. I
Mhm.
didn't set a specific timeline as to when that would be. I figured one morning I'll wake up and I'll realize that I've been doing this enough and I'm ready to take on a new challenge.
Mhm.
And I think the pandemic was that time.
Okay.
Right after I moved to Atlanta a year and a half ago, I realized that I wanted to do something more impactful than
Mhm.
I had been doing. And compliance is great. Saying that I've helped minority private equity firms grow their businesses and get increased assets under management, that's a great thing.
Mhm.
But I felt like there are so many more people that could benefit from my journey that I wasn't really leaning in on. So I decided to start another company, Jett Speaks, and we'll talk about that. But when I started Jett Speaks, I realized I can't do both. And where does my passion really lie? And so 2020 marked 30 years of my career because I graduated from law school in 1990. So I had been working for 30 years, and I said I want it to matter. I want it to mean something. And so that was the impetus to me starting Jett Speaks, where I could really start to focus on what have I learned and what can I share with my people. And there was just no room for ICS Group in that equation. So I started to think, okay, what do I do with ICS Group? And I had been getting calls from competitor firms through the years trying to buy ICS Group. So I knew whenever I was ready, there was a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy it. It was just a matter of when was I going to be ready for that. And so yeah, the timing was good. I felt like I had taken ICS Group as far as my interest and my passion for it would allow. And it was time to turn my passion to something else.
So when you sold it, how many employees did you have? And what type of annual revenues did you have at that time?
Well, ICS Group had a number of full-time. We had about 3 full-time employees that were W-2, but then all of our consultants were 1099. And that was another thing that I did to help allay the risk. So I would assign consultants to clients, and obviously there's no financial risk there because we're billing the client, I pay the consultant. And we've gotten up as much as 10, 15 consultants down to a handful of consultants, depending on the number of projects and the number of clients that we had. When the company that I eventually sold to came on board, they were a major financial services company. So they didn't necessarily need all of my consultants. They wanted the contracts.
Your book.
And that's another thing in terms of creating value. Having one-off clients who pay you and then they walk away is not creating sustainable value. So what I did from the very beginning is have our clients enter contracts with us. So there was an ongoing payment stream. And that and that's what appealed to our potential buyer. So they took a few of our consultants, but they basically folded our clients into their firm, I suppose.
So at the time you sold, were you doing 7 figures in revenues?
We were doing 7 figures in revenue.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So I want you guys to really take note. So how strategic Medina was in setting up her business in terms of having the processes documented once again and creating a scalable business, not you trading dollars for hours for dollars. And I think based on your experience, you laid a great foundation to be able to sell your business and make it more saleable. So now you mentioned something about making a difference and being passionate. And so now we're going to jump over to Jett Speaks, right?
Okay.
And you said something that touched me because when you're talking about making a difference, I always say that there's a point in time for a lot of entrepreneurs when you start out, the first thing you want to do is you want to make money to make sure that you can solidify yourself. But after a certain point, when not that you're rich, but when you're comfortable, I think a lot of times your mindset or mentality transforms a little bit about, okay, I'm good. What can I do for others? How can I help others? And I've seen interviewing a lot of entrepreneurs over these 6.5 years, myself as an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. I know my focus changed after a certain point in time with what can I do to help other people? Talk to me in the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint family about that mind shift or how that came about that you wanted to contribute more to, others' success, not just your own.
Sure. And it really wasn't a mind shift because my mind has always been there.
Cool.
And my time and efforts have always been there. I have always mentored people of color for as long as I can remember. And I have always been very community focused. And so volunteering, sitting on nonprofit boards, I've done that probably more than any business person or entrepreneur should, because I was so upset, like I am trading billable hours for volunteer hours. And that's always tough, but that's always where my heart has been. That's how I was raised, that we don't just focus on ourselves. I always tell this story. When I was younger, my mother would come outside and she'd have a handful of quarters, and it was four of us. And we would expect that we're all going to divvy up those quarters, and she would give a quarter to every kid in the neighborhood. and we'd be mad.
Right.
Like, wow, like their mother gives them money and we don't get any, but our mother comes out with money and everybody gets some. So we end up with less than everybody else now, right?
Right.
But
That's
she
funny.
she always taught us that no matter what you always have enough to share with other people. And it doesn't necessarily take away from you. And so I've always been raised that way. And so I've mentored so many people because I realized that when I came into corporate America, it was a cultural shift, but not nearly as bad as I saw other people experiencing. And that's primarily because I had gone to a private school with all white kids. Some of my best friends were white. Doesn't that sound cliche, right? But when I went into corporate America, it wasn't that much of a shift for me because that had been my experience.
Right.
But I realized that a lot of other people of color were having a really tough time. They had not gone to school and had not had the exposure to dealing with code switching, which is very necessary at that point. And so I was mentoring a lot of them in terms of, how do you navigate corporate America? How do you manage this role? How do you set out trying to find the right mentor who can help you in your particular company or organization? And I've always had a thing also with mentoring Black men, because Black boys come out of college and I think they fare the worst from my perspective because of the fear factor. And we've seen how that plays out. So I've always had a thing where I've mentored young Black men who graduated from my college. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And so through the years, I've mentored young students while they were students at Wesleyan. And then after they come out at Wesleyan, I've got some mentees who are now managing directors at JP Morgan and running the international business at Aetna, who started interning for me when they were in college, and I've mentored them through the years. And so that's just always been my thing. But I wanted to, like I said, lean into it more, because when you're running your own business, there's only so much time left to do that.
Right.
And I somehow, found time. I used to say, who said the day is 24 hours? I think it has 34. I would always create hours somehow, but starting ICS Group really gave me much more focus to formalize what I wanted to do. And so my focus has always been closing the Black wealth gap. Right. And so years ago, I started a nonprofit, Financial Literacy for All, with my son, actually, who's a student at Morehouse. And what we do is train people in underrepresented neighborhoods, primarily Black neighborhoods, how to manage money. A lot of them never really learned how to manage the money that you have so that you're living within your means, you're able to put money away for savings, you're able to start buying a stock or two.
Right.
When Colin Kaepernick did the ad for Nike and everybody's like, oh, great for Nike, I'm going to buy me a pair of sneakers just to celebrate. I'm like, oh, no, buy a stock, buy a share of stock in Nike. And so that's always been my thing in terms of teaching us how to manage our money.
Right.
And so Jett Speaks focuses on all things related to closing the wealth gap. So I see us in our career challenges. For most of us, our careers are our greatest asset, and we're not managing our careers effectively in order to optimize the assets that we're going to get from that. And so it starts with choosing the right career, having a mentor who can expose you to the world of finance or medicine or technology or whatever it is that's going to earn you a much greater income than some of these other professions I see us going into.
Right.
And so a lot of people roll their eyes, and I've seen it when I'm giving a talk and people are rolling their eyes because I'm talking about social work and how stop doing that. And it's great, you want to help people, but you can help people a lot more with $1 million in your bank account than you can living paycheck to paycheck trying to help your community. And so I am very, very, direct about that. Manage your career, and then not just in terms of picking the right career, but how do you manage your career strategically so that you can make it to the senior level where you're getting the stock options and you're getting the, multi-million-dollar salaries and getting put on corporate boards. All of those things we need to do better. And it's primarily because we don't have the role models. Our parents didn't live that life. And so there's really nobody for us to emulate. So I do group coaching for people of color all around how to be more strategic with your career. So I do a GPS, Guide to Professional Success 101, and a Guide to Professional Success 201 for entry-level people and mid-level people trying to get to senior level. And it's all around everything that I learned along the way to become a senior executive at 3 Fortune 100 companies. And it wasn't just happenstance.
Right.
It was strategy that helped me to do that. It was seeing the person that I need to meet and making my way to develop a relationship with that person so that that person could then champion my name in those senior team meetings and get me that promotion or get me into that next grade assignment, all strategy. And we need to learn how to do that better. And then the other part of Jett Speaks is I realize even if we're doing everything we need to do to close our gaps in terms of our ability to perform in corporate America, if the company is not equitable and is not inclusive and doesn't value diversity, it's all for naught. And so right after George Floyd was murdered, I realized that there's a lot of work to be done on the other side too. And I don't have to have Jett Speaks just be focused on what we need to do better. It's also what the companies need to do better. And so we also do diversity and inclusion consulting for companies, for colleges and universities, and now for the government. And so we go out and help companies because from my perspective, having grown up in corporate America till I got to that point where I am in those rooms where decisions are being made, I feel like I now have all the secrets for how this actually happens. And why is it that all the white guys are getting the promotions and getting the great assignments? Because they've got sponsors in the room. They're out building relationships with the right people. Their dad is best friends from college with the CEO. They've got all of these ins. And so getting corporate America to realize that the way they've always done business has to change if they're going to see more Black people at senior levels. And so the diversity consulting is a piece that I think is crucial for companies, but it has its collateral benefits, obviously, for people of color.
So basically you have like almost a 4-pronged attack, like career development, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and diversity.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Now that's a great all complementary. And one of the things that I love about your story, Medina, is you're taking all of the skills and talents and experience that you've built up and you're putting it all together. And now you're using that to empower other people and also empower companies to increase the diversity. I just did an interview with a brother that is head of diversity for, I forgot the name of the company off the top of my head. And I asked him, they're starting to do loans in their local communities, wherever their footprint is in the Carolinas and the Midwest. And they're doing loans or grants for Black entrepreneurs. And I asked him, I said, well, how, and I want to ask you this too, how hard is it to get heads of corporations, senior executives to buy in to actually taking action on diversity at this time? What are your thoughts on that? And I know most companies that they should be doing it anyway, but have you found that there's certain companies that don't really buy into that or are not really as concerned about that as others?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
And I think the more white a company is, and by that I mean just those companies who have traditionally not been very diverse, like financial services companies.
Right.
They have gotten it in their minds that they are that way because there are no qualified Black people out there to be hired. And it's not them, it's us. You know?
Right.
And that's what I find, and getting them past that. And one of the reasons I went into financial services is to try to allay that. Like, well, no. I am Black and I'm female, and I am one of the best in the business in terms of regulatory compliance for asset management. But the thought always is, yeah, but that's just you. There are not 1,000 more of you.
Right.
And I think a lot of the work that we have to do is exposing our young people to these fields so that we can say, look, we've got 100 Black students coming out of Morehouse, all with financial services aspirations,
Right.
or whatever it is. So we certainly have to do some work to build the pipeline, but a lot of those companies need to also be more intentional about recruiting
Right.
and finding the out of the box person who may have transferable skills that would make them great in this role. But then that's where equity comes in, where they have to do a little bit more or something different for these candidates in order to get them into the roles where they're needed.
Right.
And so I talk a lot about equity, and I see the light bulb going off for a lot of these companies because they used to think, oh, we treat everybody the same. And they would say that as if they were doing great things by treating everybody the same.
Right.
And I talk to them about equity, like equity requires you do something different. And you realize that this particular employee is going to need something different than all of your other white employees because this is a new environment for them. There's nobody else for them to look to emulate or to see their path to success.
Yes. Right.
And and so it's I've been having some really, really good conversations with senior leaders. And another thing that I've been sharing with them is just as we saw at the insurrection at the Capitol,
Right.
that there are racists among us, people.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
don't be fooled. They are our next door neighbors. They're in our police departments. They're in our corporations. They're a lot of our managers at work.
exactly.
And I think seeing what happened at the Capitol opened a lot of white people's eyes to, whoa, like this is really real. And these are everyday people who showed up at that Capitol.
Exactly.
And so when I talk to them about all of the things that hold people of color back, it's people like that that are embedded in there too. And so I talk to them not just about trying to find creative ways to hire us, but be much more intentional and focused to make sure that you're weeding out those people in your organization that don't align with your corporate values, because
Right.
they're the ones that are hindering your progress in terms of diversity.
Exactly.
So we have some real conversations, but it's good stuff.
It's so in terms of you almost have two different verticals. So obviously you're dealing with the companies with diversity. Talk to me about what you do with individuals. And I know you mentioned you have group coaching and
Coaching.
things of that nature. How can you affect say the BEB members want to tap into what you're doing? What are some of the things that you can help them achieve?
Sure. So I offer group coaching. A lot of people come to me right through my website and they sign up that way. A lot of our clients also come to us from the corporations. So if I do diversity consulting or if I do a diversity talk, and part of my talk is focusing on training and equity for their Black employees, they then will sign up for 10 slots in my group coaching course and
Wow.
send a lot of their high potential Black employees through my course.
Cool.
Because what I realized, and I had an executive coach when I was a senior executive at Prudential, and they assigned me a coach primarily because they said I needed to tone down my passion. And and I kid you not, the actual words were, I need to smooth out my edges. They actually said that to a Black woman. And I knew what they meant.
Right.
Because I am me and I am a passionate person. And when I'm in a meeting and I'm trying to get a point across, I'm trying to get my point across. And people were intimidated by that. It was the angry Black woman that they thought. I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm just passionate. And so they assigned me a white man as an executive coach. And he couldn't understand where I was coming from. And he didn't understand my struggle and trying to make sure that I'm heard and I'm not talked over, but at the same time, trying to walk that line between appearing intimidating and angry, but being respected as the senior leader. And so a lot of times I find what Black executives and Black employees need is somebody who can relate to them and their struggle and can speak to them, Black woman to Black woman, in terms of how do we get where we need to go in the right way.
Right.
And so companies are starting to realize that necessarily means something different than the executive coach that they've always used for their white employees.
Exactly.
And so the way the course works, I have online classes on through my learning platform. People sign up for the course, they're assigned to a cohort. They go through the weekly sessions online on their own time throughout the week. I have a companion guide that provides exercises, some questions for them to really, really try to get at where they are and what's going on in their mind. And then we meet once a week as a group, and we talk. And sometimes our sessions are quite therapeutic. I feel like I need to have couches in everybody's living rooms, because it really gets to the heart of what a lot of people of color are frustrated with in terms of their corporate journey.
Definitely.
And I'm finding it's so helpful for them, but then it's also so gratifying for me to feel like everything that I've went through, and it has not been an easy path at all, but everything that I've learned through my journey, other people don't have to repeat the same mistakes. They can benefit from what I've learned and how I went about things, and the types of things that I thought about when I was considering a new move. When do you finally, get fed up and decide it's time to move to a different company because this one just doesn't get it and doesn't get me? And so we talk about a lot of that stuff, and people just rave about the course in terms of their transformation after they come out the other side.
So tell me, or tell the BEB family how they can enroll in your courses and your different learning modules.
Sure, it's easy. Just go to jettspeaks.com and
T's,
you'll
right?
see, what's that?
Two T's, right?
2 T's, yep, just like my last name, jettspeaks.com. And you can go into the coaching segment and it lists all of the courses there, and you can sign up and it'll take you to the landing page. You can get enrolled. And for those, and some people say, gee, your courses are kind of pricey. They're really not.
Right.
It takes an investment in realizing that nothing that you're going to value, you're going to get for free. Exactly. But I set it up as a group course so that the cost is spread among everybody in the cohort. I don't do individual coaching except for very senior executives who can afford to pay me for individual coaching. Right. Most people of color either can't or don't feel like they want to do that. And so the pricing is quite reasonable. But for those who still have a challenge with the pricing, you might want to talk to your company to see what training or what benefits they provide for training. Because I've had some people do that, and the company at least covered half the cost.
Get sponsored.
The session. Yeah,
that'd be great. How about with entrepreneurship? Do you have anything for people that want to be entrepreneurs?
Yes. So the same thing, similar to GPS 101, we have Launch and Soar, which is a course for people who are considering starting a business, but they need to understand all that it takes to get started, not just creating a business plan, but really, really thinking through, what does your capital look like? How are you going to sell? Are you going to open a storefront? Are you going to be, online, digital? What are your cost of goods sold? What's your profit margin even look like? A lot of these things, people don't really have a sense for the economics behind starting a business. Exactly. They know they make a really good cookie, but Mrs. Fields had a lot more than a good cookie recipe. Like, you really need to know, what are your ingredients going to cost? What is your staff going to cost? And so I help people really understand how to get started, from starting an LLC or a partnership to figuring out your finances. Are you going to need funding right off the bat? What friends and family do you have that you can rely on? Because you aren't going to find many banks willing to loan money to somebody with a great cookie recipe, so you got to get started. And then the SOAR component is for those companies that have already been going either by themselves or 1 or 2 employees, but they realize that they need to really scale up. And so I help them look at what that looks like and how do they do that.
Nah, that's great, because we need those resources, and especially from people that have done it and experienced it. So I always talk about theory all the time, theory versus practical application. And theory is great, but you will not know everything, and you still won't know everything until you get out and do it. And that's when you really get the what I call the know-how. So I always talk about the difference between knowledge and know-how. Knowledge, you can get it by reading, watching something. And I use the example all the time. And I know the BEB family, the older BEB family has heard this before, but I always have to say this. So knowledge can be acquired by many ways: reading, watching something, listening to something. So if I have a flight manual for an F-15 fighter jet and I read it from cover to cover, I watch somebody do it, I'm in the back of the cockpit while the pilot is flying it, I've got the knowledge. Now, when they say, hey, Jay, we're pulling this out for you today, you're going to fly this thing. The question is, do I know how to do it? No.
Right,
Know-how
right.
comes from doing and taking
From
action.
actually doing it. And
Yeah.
that's what a lot of my corporate clients start to realize, because when I talk about diversity, I am talking about diversity from the position of a Black woman who's gone through corporate America, who sees the impact of institutional racism and disparate practices and the impact on me and people around me. Whereas a lot of diversity companies out there are made up of HR people or folks who have never actually been in a corporate role other than HR.
Right.
They can sort of see it from afar, but until you've actually lived it, until you've actually sat in that room and taken the comments from people, or had your team go off and have a retreat and realize that they gave your admin the wrong day, so that you're not even, like, things that I've had to endure that I can talk to companies about and share those stories. They're like, wow, you've actually walked that walk.
Exactly.
And I think that's what sets me apart from a lot of folks that are out there. Is like, I'm talking from firsthand experience.
Exactly.
What it's been like and what companies need to do a better job.
Yeah, that's a big thing. And I think that resonates with your clients and also the individuals that you coach. Because one of the things is, as a serial entrepreneur with over 17 businesses, and I enjoy the business of putting things together. And it's funny, when I interview people, I've had people tell me that, oh, you ask some questions that people that haven't been in business don't ask me. And I said, yeah, it's just because I'm doing that. I make my living as an entrepreneur. So I'm living what I'm speaking. I'm not just a moderator on the topic per se. I got 3 quick questions for you. I know we're up against it. All of your career, it seems like it is going, like, not smooth, but it's been a nice progression. Can you tell us about a time in your entrepreneurial journey that you've had problems, setbacks, or issues? How did you handle it, if you were able to handle it, and what did you learn from it? So I know no business goes straight from 0 to 100.
Yeah. So I actually had a setback back in 2016. And it was, and I'll tell you about the setback and then why it was so troubling and so memorable for me. The company was rocking and rolling. We were going along, getting in new clients. I had one client that was an African American owned private equity fund that I had started with years and years ago when they were really, really small. They grew assets. I was there for them, working with them all along the way to their path to success. There came a time when they got so big that they decided it was time for them to hire a general counsel. The general counsel happened to be a lesbian Black woman. And she came on board and didn't like me.
Wow.
And I don't really understand why she didn't like me. Part of it had to do with the fact that I had a great relationship with the 2 heads of the firm. And she was trying to sort of take on that role of their go-to person, advisor, as opposed to me, which I had always been. But long story short, she eventually decided that she no longer needed my firm services.
Wow.
And she fired us.
Wow.
And it was the most unsettling situation to know that an African American person would do that to another, when we were really just one of the best in the business and had gone above and beyond for this particular client. And it said to me that as far as we go, there are always going to be people out there, not just white people, but Black people too, who are haters, who don't want to see you be successful and succeed. And when I think about that a lot, because that client had grown to be one of our largest clients. And so that was it was a financial hit
Right.
when she decided that they no longer needed our services. And I'll just never forget that. It really, really caused me to think back, like, what could I have done differently? Was there anything at all I could have done differently to make that relationship work, to not end up where we were? And
Right.
one of the things I always loved about being an entrepreneur is that I didn't have to endure the racism that I faced in corporate America. But when I went into entrepreneurship, I realized that nothing's changed.
Right.
You know, nothing's changed at all. People still need to want to hire you and want to work with you. And it's even worse because in corporate America, at least you've got some policies that people need to
Right.
comply with.
Right.
There's nothing out there saying that one business has to hire this business.
Exactly.
Nothing at all. And so you really have no cover once you're out here. I always talk about that in terms of the Me Too movement. Well, I'm like,
Right.
well, at least you guys have sexual harassment policies.
Right.
I'm just out here. I'm at conferences, out for
Right.
drinks with clients, and I have no cover. And
Right.
so that's one of the things about entrepreneurship, that you gotta have really, really thick skin,
Yeah.
and you gotta be resilient and able to just brush it off and keep going. But that's one of the things that was a setback financially for ICS Group. And it came at the hands of another Black woman, which was just really
Wow.
troubling.
Were you able to talk to the founders of the company after that and try
I
to?
did. I did. I talked to them and I tried to get them to understand the relationship challenges. And they kind of knew about the relationship challenges at the beginning because we
Right.
were very close like that.
Right.
But one of their concerns is she was the third person that they had brought into that role, and they couldn't afford to risk losing somebody else out of that really key role. And
Gotcha.
so they had to defer to her. It was either me or her,
Right.
basically.
Right.
And so they could replace me, but
Yeah.
replacing her would have been damaging to them.
Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah, it was just
Yeah,
one of those things.
that's a tough pill to swallow right there.
Yeah.
Especially when you go above and beyond the call of duty. And one
Yeah.
of my buddies, a former business partner of mine, always used to say, he said, "Man, the people that you do the most for appreciate it the least." I'm like, a lot of
Yeah.
times that's a truism. That's a
Yep.
truism.
Yep.
You go above and beyond, and you still get the sand kicked in your face. Second to last question. Um, is there anything that I negated to ask you, or is there anything that you wanted to share with the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint family before I ask you this final question?
Um, so yeah, one thing we didn't touch on is the international space.
Okay.
So one of the things with ICS Group, I always knew that when although Trump referred to Africa as a shithole country, continent, but I
Right.
always wanted to do more to help people of color and black people in Africa.
Right.
And I remember the naysayers, how are you going to impact a continent? Do you realize your firm is small? Like, what are you going to do?
Right.
The world is so small. I would say don't just set your sights on business that you can get in the United States.
Right.
So several years ago, I decided I wanted to launch in Africa, and there was a need for my services in Africa, particularly with private equity funds that were starting up to try to fund a lot of the infrastructural developments going on the continent.
Mhm.
And they were trying to access capital from the United States, from China. They were having a hard time accessing capital because of the reputation for corruption that a lot of these funds have on that continent. And
Right.
so I did a lot of work with the industry associations over there and a number of private equity clients to really try to help them put the right compliance infrastructure in place so that they could then earn the trust of asset allocators so they could
Right.
get funding to fund the projects, which lifts the entire continent.
Exactly.
And so the work that I did in Africa got noticed by Harvard Business School, and they actually did a case study in the Harvard Business Review around ICS Group and our launch into Africa. And so that's
Yeah.
something that I'm not only proud of in terms of the impact that we were able to have, but I try to get people to realize that there are opportunities around the globe. And particularly now where most work is done remotely, I could be having a conversation with you in Philly and a same conversation with somebody in Nigeria. and the work still gets done. So don't limit yourself just to the US, because there's so much opportunity outside the US that we can leverage.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. Tremendous, because you're right. A lot of times we only think about this small scope. We don't even think about Canada, you know,
Right.
and we're attached to Canada. It's only the US. And so that is a great point to think more globally as opposed to just here in the States. Medina, last question for you. If you had the opportunity to have a conversation with one person, living or dead, who would it be and why? Drum roll, please. Now,
drum roll, please. Who would it be and why? The Honorable Constance Baker Motley.
Okay.
So Constance Baker Motley is my cousin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she had always been a mentor to me coming out of law school. Mm-hmm. Constance went into public service right out of law school. She could have joined one of the big, larger law firms in New York, but instead she went to work for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Mm-hmm. And for the folks who don't know Judge Motley, she was actually the Black female who stood behind the civil rights movement. She was the one arguing cases before the Supreme Court to desegregate white schools. Wow. She was the one arguing for Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers to get them out of prison when they would get arrested. And she was that legal beagle behind holding that entire civil rights movement up. When I got out of law school and took a job at a large firm in Connecticut, I remember her being somewhat disappointed that I didn't go into public service. Right. And I said, I got student loans. Right. I gotta pay
make that mortgage.
Money. I couldn't afford to dedicate my entire career to public service, but I did make a commitment to her that I would spend as much as my time as I could in public service. And that's really what fueled me to be so involved in giving back to the community. Mm-hmm. Constance died about 14 years ago. Oh, wow. And given that I've now started Jett Speaks, where I am doing so much more for the community, I would love to have a conversation with her now and just see whether she is proud of the work that I'm doing. I remember when I sold ICS Group and I put a post on LinkedIn and I said my ancestors would be proud, not because I made a boatload of money, but right. Because I was one of few Black women to actually have a company that became acquired, that was grown and scaled and sold. Right. And now I'm taking those resources and basically funding another business where I'm able to give back in a major way. And so I would love to have a conversation with her now versus that conversation we had 30 years ago. Oh, wow. And just sort of talk about what the next 10, 20 years look like for me in terms of my ability to be more impactful as she had been.
Medina, before we close on out, tell people how they can get in touch with you, any social media handles, website, how the BEB family can support what you're doing.
Okay, sure. So my website is www.jettspeaks.com. I'm on Facebook at Jett Speaks, and I'm on LinkedIn at Jett Speaks. It's pretty easy. Just remember, cool. I am Jett and I am speaking.
Cool. Well, we appreciate your knowledge, your wisdom, and for sharing with the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint family. Anytime you got anything else going on, please reach out to me. Like I said, let's definitely exchange numbers. And, my platform is here for everybody else. It's not my platform, it's your platform. Okay. So I really appreciate you sharing with the BEB family. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
That was an amazing interview with Miss Medina Jett of Jett Speaks. And before I give some of my takeaways from this interview, let me just share my social media contact information and my resource links. So I mentioned at the top of the show, my new book is out, A New Black Wall Street, Circulating the Black Dollar Worldwide by Building Successful E-Commerce Businesses. So if you're interested in building a successful, sustainable e-commerce business, go to anewblackwallstreet.com. Pick yourself up a copy, $14.95 for the print version, $9.95 for the digital version. Now, if you need additional assistance building your successful, sustainable e-commerce business, my flagship program, Brand Builder Academy Elite, BBAelite.com. So if you're interested in building a physical products brand or a digital products brand, make sure you go to bbaelite.com. It is a 14-week implementation program that takes you from ideation all the way to selling your products or services online on other platforms and also creating your own platform. And if you use the code BBAELITE100, you save $100 off the program. Now, I also mentioned at the top of the show, I created 2 platforms to help circulate dollars in the worldwide black economy. The first one is besmartbyblack.com. So if you are a black product producer that wants to sell your products to black consumers worldwide, upload your information to besmartbyblack.com. It is free to do so. Now, I didn't forget you freelancers. So if you do anything on Fiverr.com or freelancer.com, go to hireblackfreelancers.com and upload your information. HIRE blackfreelancers.com. Once again, if you want to connect with black consumers and black businesses that want to hire black freelancers, make sure you go to Hire Black Freelancers. I also mentioned at the top of the show, my new rebranded, rebooted Black Entrepreneur Blueprint Academy is up and running, guys. You can go to bebacademy.com and get 5 days free access to all the online trainings, courses, and webinars that I've created over the 6.5 years. And it's free access for 5 days. bebacademy.com. Now, all of that information can be found at bebconnect.com, which is a page on my website. Now, I'm about to give you guys all my social media contact information, but you can just go to bebconnect.com, and once again, everything will be there for you. Now, if you want to reach out to me anything long, hit me on my email, jjones@blackentrepreneurblueprint.com, JAYJONES at blackentrepreneurblueprint.com. Facebook, connect with me there. Just look at Facebook, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint, and connect with me on that platform. Twitter, hit me at jjones@001, JAYJONES 001. Instagram, I have 2 IG handles. The main one is jjones for real, JAYJONES, the number 4, REAL, and also on Instagram, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Now, YouTube family, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I have additional content on YouTube that does not come out on the podcast. Yes, the podcast does come out on YouTube, but make sure you go to YouTube, type in Black Entrepreneur Blueprint, and hit that subscribe button. Also, LinkedIn, you can find me. Please connect with me there, J Jones, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. And if you're on Clubhouse, connect with me there at I am J Jones, at I am J Jones. Now, here's some of the things that stood out to me in today's interview and some takeaways from this interview with Medina Jett. One of the things that I liked is Medina, when she started her first business, ICS, she actually used the skills and talents and tools that she had gained working in corporate America and just used that to transition from employee to entrepreneur in her own business. So she stayed in her lane. She stayed with something that she was familiar with. Now, that's not to say that's the only way to transition from employee to entrepreneur. There are many successful entrepreneurs that have gone into businesses that were totally different from their corporate careers. Also, another thing that stuck out to me was when Medina talked about the formation of Jett Speaks. Why did she form that? What was the impetus? And that impetus was making an impact. So she felt that she could make a better impact with Jett Speaks than what she was previously doing. And so her passion was focused on career development, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and diversity. And she was able to package that up into Jett Speaks to make that impact. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, many times we don't focus on impact right away as entrepreneurs because we're trying to make sure that we're financially in good shape. And then I think sometimes, not that it's a mind shift, you always have that in your mind. But once you can get that focus out of the way of, hey, I need to be able to make enough money to live and be prosperous. Once you hit a certain level, I think impact becomes more important to you as you move forward in your life. Another thing that I also like that Medina talked about was thinking on a global perspective. Many times our thinking is too small or too short-sighted. And I know you got to crawl before you walk. It's all a process. But I think that if we enhance our goals and we think more on a global perspective, we can have even more impact than just here in the States or wherever that you're located. I also think that this interview with Medina can really be broken down into a case study where you go to corporate America, you get all the tools and experience that you need, then you transition out to entrepreneurship, and not just entrepreneurship, but impact. So I think this is a great case study for any of you listening that are currently employees right now and you're looking to branch out on your own and transition into entrepreneurship. A tremendous story. Also, guys, make sure that you support Medina and what she's doing. Check out jettspeaks.com, Jett speaks.com. And make sure if you're interested in any of her programs, make sure you sign up for the programs. That's why we have these guests on here, to help impart knowledge, to give you that know-how so you can move forward. Now, before we close on out, family, I say it each and every week, we get more and more downloads, and that's due to the BEB family. And once again, I couldn't thank you guys more. Please continue to spread the word about the podcast, the blog, and once again, the movement. It's about building an economic power base in the Black community. There's no revolution, family, without economics. We need that to move this revolution forward. So make sure that you have a conscious effort, or take a conscious effort, to build and support Black-owned businesses. Love you guys. See you same time next week. Peace.